Now, I realize when it comes to hiring the general manager, it's one thing. You typically end up hiring guys that are in that spot for the first time. General managers don't get as many second chances, and it's few and far between. And if guys end up being successful in that role, they tend to be a little stickier in the organization that put them into that general manager spot. So when you look at Ryan Poles, especially if Rick Smith wasn't going to be interested or wasn't going to be actively pursuing a job, we'll find out how that works. But you'll have to forgive me. Whereas I swear to God, Chicago Bears fans tried to do all types of mental gymnastics to the point that you would swear they would have to be the fittest and not one of the fattest fan bases in the NFL by always trying to convince themselves that every move this organization makes, that they have absolutely no reason to give them the benefit of the doubt or believe they've actually made the right call. But every decision is right, and every decision deserves chances, and every decision deserves your belief in it and trust in it for absolutely no goddamn reason. I don't choose to take that path. I say, prove it. I say, show me. I say, I'm not going to do all these mental gymnastics and these creative mind tricks to try and convince myself of something that isn't reality. The Bears' decision for head coach has come. And it's Matt Eberflus. Who, you say? Good question. The defensive coordinator of the Indianapolis Colts the past 4 seasons. More on that in a moment. But let's address an elephant in the room. This belief that a lot of Bears fans and dumbass media are going to throw out there that is total bullshit when you think about it, on how Ryan Poles came in and he told Bean Counting Ted and Goofy George McCaskey, oh, gosh. He told the same guy that came in business fucking cash in his Bears coat and George, that picked him up at the damn airport, that he and he alone is going to choose the goddamn head coach of the team, which on the surface is something you want to believe, which on the surface is something you want to believe in. But ultimately, Ryan Poles is hired, and within like 48 hours, the Bears already have a new head coach. Forgive me for throwing the bullshit flag on this. Yeah, he 100% had say-so on the damn hire. From a pre-selected list of candidates that was chosen for him and handed off to him by the Bears hiring committee, which included Ted Phillips, which included Goofy George McCaskey, and included goddamn Bill Polian. Like, what type of bullshit is that? Oh, he chose his own candidate from a predetermined, pre-selected list. The hell was the rush here? Why not interview more candidates? You might say, why didn't he hire Eric Bieniemy? Perhaps a more telling story is he was around Eric Bieniemy the past few seasons, worked with him. And you would think your first shot at general manager, if you actually believed in Eric Bieniemy and you trusted in Eric Bieniemy, you would bring in Eric Bieniemy. And he didn't. That's interesting, but talks more about Eric Bieniemy necessarily than it does Ryan Poles. But what exactly was the FOMO, fear of missing out here with Eberflus? How many teams were really hot for this guy? How many teams were really knocking down the door for this dude? And even then you say, you know already. Bears football! No matter what, no matter what! This was not the Bears' top choice. This was not the Bears' first guy. If you believe that, you're being fucking naive. You want to believe the reports about Goofy George when it comes to Jim Harbaugh and why that didn't work out? I actually kind of do, because that sounds exactly like the history of the Chicago Bears organization. Have a top guy in mind and then fail to pony up the dough and dole out the turkey in order to make it happen. Dreaming versus creating actual realization of said dream. That is Bears football! And as much as I want to say, well, at least it wasn't Dan Quinn. And I agree. I want no part of Dan Quinn. It makes you wonder, was Eberflus really the guy? Or were they about to go with Dan Quinn, and then Dan Quinn makes the decision that he's going to go back to being the defensive coordinator in 2022, and they settled on this guy. So was Eberflus even the second choice? Or was he the third? Yeah, that inspires real confidence. And we've been down this path before. Dick Duran wasn't the first choice of this team in '99. That was Dave McGinnis. That was the disastrous situation where they were announcing he was hired, but he wasn't. That led to Virginia actually reassigning and demoting her damn son, Michael McCaskey. 2004, Lovie Smith wasn't the top choice. Nick Saban was. And Jerry Angelo and Ted Phillips lowballed Nick Saban, and that's how you ended up with Lovie Smith instead. So there's a history here of not getting their top choice. Now, you can say sometimes they did get their top choice. Mark Trestman, John Fox, Matt Nagy. And how did that work out? So no matter what, Bears football all the way around. But if you look at this hire, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be doing the mental gymnastics trying to convince myself this is something great or something awesome until proven otherwise. Why the fuck should I? This organization has done nothing to indicate that they deserve to have the benefit of the doubt. And I saw somebody post on Twitter on Thursday talking about the split, that Goofy George and others wanted Jim Caldwell. But fucking Ryan Poles and Ted Phillips wanted Matt Eberflus. I promise you, I guarantee you, if you want me to be on board with a head coaching hire by the Chicago Bears, the way to not do that is tell me that Ted Phillips agrees with the decision. You get what I'm saying? That already in and of itself should be a goddamn red flag. But when you look at Matt Eberflus, the candidate, look at him as the candidate. The last 4 seasons, he's been the Colts defensive coordinator. Their defensive unit has finished top 10 in the league in points allowed 3 times in 4 seasons, but never in the top 5. So pretty good units, never elite. Never elite. Only once were they in the top 10 for yards allowed. So 3 times in the top 10 for points allowed, only once in the top 10 for yards allowed. Typical type of shit, you would say, out of a Lovie-style kind of cover 2 defense. You give up a lot of yards, you turn teams over quite a bit, you don't give up as many points. But it still has its own flaws and its challenges in and of itself. And I can imagine right now, Colts Twitter, Colts fans aren't exactly that shook up about Eberflus being gone. I promise you, they're not. That might be like, I'll be interested to see what happens next. They might say, oh, this isn't great. But they won't exactly be raging about it or crying about it or saying, oh my God, how bad this sucks. When you look at this team, in 2021, they were 9th in points allowed and 16th in yards allowed defensively. Talk about the Colts under Eberflus. They were 3rd in INTs, 2nd in turnovers forced in the league. That's great, but only 23rd in sacks, so it didn't generate a ton of pressure. They did force a lot of turnovers, but forcing turnovers isn't at quite the same premium as it used to be in the NFL. Teams don't turn the ball over as much. Offensive styles have changed, period. So when you're basing your defensive philosophy on that, it could be very flawed at times, especially in big spots and key games. And if you don't get those turnovers, you could be in trouble. And this guy was such a hot candidate for the Bears. They were so hot to trot for a guy from a team that didn't even make the goddamn playoffs in 2021. Seriously. So a guy that comes in that never had an elite defense in Indianapolis, didn't even be part of a playoff team in 2021. But this is a guy that you're expecting you to lead you to the goddamn mountaintop. Make it make sense, people. It doesn't fucking make sense. That's the problem. And as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to sit there and hire somebody to run a damn Lovie Smith style defense, then hire fucking Lovie Smith. At least let me get somebody that's better at running a Lovie Smith defense. Let me get old Lovie from Sandy, Texas and damn South. Such a hot candidate, never had an elite defense in Indy, didn't even make the playoffs this year, gagged it up big time in Week 18 against the Jaguars with the playoff spot on the line. You know what that sounds like to me? Bears football! And all these fans trying to invoke, oh, I hope this is Lovie Smith, or this reminds them of Lovie Smith. This reminds me way more of Dick Duran than it does goddamn Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith, if you remember, he was the defensive coordinator for the Rams for a couple of seasons. And before that, he had been a defensive assistant under Tony Dungy in Tampa Bay. He had been around elite-level defense. He went to St. Louis that Super Bowl season. That was a hellified, damn good defense that they had, and he had a stark, dramatic turnaround there very quickly. So, to sit there and say they're comparable, they're absolutely not. They're absolutely not. If anything, you could argue Eberflus runs a slightly dated defensive scheme that a lot of teams employ, but still slightly dated. And hiring a defensive-minded head coach, this whole rotation now, you've gotten into this odd cycle of from Lovie Smith to fucking Mark Trestman to John Fox to Matt Nagy. Now we're back to a defensive guy, which to me is indicative of an organization that doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. And everything you see in terms of their on-field product, it gives you an indication they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And you're hiring a defensive-minded head coach at a point in time in your organization's history, not only of an era of offensive dominance, specifically in the NFC, but in the entire NFL as a whole, but where Justin Fields is totally and exclusively your number one priority, hiring a defensive-minded head coach is peak Bears football. Now you look at this. The 32 teams in the NFL in 2021, out of the 32 teams, who started as head coaches? The AFC side, 7 of the 16 head coaches were offensive guys. 8 were defensive, and then you have former special teams guy John Harbaugh. NFC side, 11 of the 16 coaches were on the offensive side of the ball. 4 defensive coaches and special teams guy Joe Judge. More importantly, though, as you look at the 2021 playoffs, all 7 NFC teams were led by offensive-minded guys. 4 of the 7 AFC teams were led by defensive guys. You got Cincinnati and Kansas City were the exceptions, along with Rick Bisaccia, the interim head coach in Las Vegas. But wouldn't you know, out of the 8 divisional round teams, 6 of those have offensive-minded head coaches leading the way. All 4 of the teams that made it to the conference championship round. Now, you could say correlation does not equal causation, and perhaps there is an argument to be made. But there is also something about reading the tea leaves of the trends of the NFL and understanding the dynamics that are shifting here and having to get on board. You could certainly make an argument and say, hey, you know what? Maybe you go counterculture to that, and that's the way that you win. The problem with that is the Bears have been trying that for 2 goddamn decades, and it's been a whole lot of Bears football. Why in the hell would you want history to repeat itself again? I always thought Bean Counting Ted and Goofy George were idiots and nincompoops, incompetent, and over their damn heads when it comes to the football operation. But now we can add insane to their fucking resumes, their LinkedIn pages, whatever. Like even 2020, you look at the 2020 playoffs. 5 of the NFC teams, led by offensive coaches. All 4 teams in the divisional round, offensive coaches. Both conference championship teams, offensive coaches. Super Bowl champion, offensive coach. And you can say, well, they have fucking Tom Brady. Okay, but there's also something to that. It's not just about Brady in and of itself. It's about approach. It's about philosophy. It's about play calling. It's about all of that. AFC side, conference champion, ultimately an offensive-minded head coach. Like, these are the trends and patterns that you're going with. You look at the last 5 Super Bowl champions, you throw out Belichick, the other 3 were all offensive guys. They were. Peterson, Reed, you get what I'm saying? Arians. That's the path we're going down here. And especially if you even look at the past 15 years, if you take Belichick out of it, it's way more offensive-minded head coaches that win Super Bowls and make it to Super Bowls than it is defensive guys. But sure, I'm the one with the flawed thinking here. I'm the one that's thinking about this wrong because I'm not sitting there and sipping the goddamn Kool-Aid and just buying into Team Eberflus here. Well, excuse the fuck out of me. Yes, I'm happy it's not Dan Quinn. But then you're going to say it will be so critical to who he wants to hire as his offensive staff. And I see some of you idiots calling about Joe Brady. Joe Brady didn't even make it through 1 year in Carolina, but all of a sudden he's the answer to your goddamn prayers. What the fuck is wrong with you? Seriously. Yes, a fall guy there, I get that. But really? Really? Unbelievable. Yes, the offensive staff is really important. But you're going to say, well, if the offensive staff is a success, and that means Justin Fields is a success, then long term the offensive staff isn't going to matter as much because those guys will get promoted and you'll have your star quarterback. Until you realize basically what you're describing is Dan Quinn in Atlanta. The first couple of seasons, he was able to ride on the coattails of Kyle Shanahan and that offensive staff. What the fuck happened once they made it to the Super Bowl that year and had the 28-3 gag job? The key members of that offensive staff left. And what happened was the offense could only carry but so much of the weight, and that defense continued to suck. I'm sorry, but if you're a defensive coordinator and you can't even have an elite or close to elite unit, the Colts unit was good. They were pretty good, but they were not great. They were not elite. Then why in the bluest of blue fucks would you want to expand that guy's responsibilities and put him in charge of your entire on-field operation? That makes no goddamn sense to me. God. Now, I will grant you, the names and the candidates weren't the most exciting this go-round. But if Justin Fields' development was truly your biggest priority, then Jim Caldwell should have been the guy. Here's a guy that helped Peyton Manning become what Peyton Manning became. This is a guy that put in great work with Joe Flacco and had him playing some of his best football ever in that 2012 stretch in the playoffs. This is a guy that went to Detroit and had Matthew Stafford producing some of his best years. Took the Lions to 3 winning seasons in 4 years. This is the fucking Detroit Lions. Couple of playoff appearances. There's an established pattern and trend as an offensive coordinator, a play caller, a head coach. This guy has been successful at the most important side of the ball, involving the most important damn position. That's the guy I should have put in charge. Yeah, he's 67, everything like that. But I'd rather have a guy at 67 that's equipped for the job than a guy at 50 or 51 that freaking isn't. Like, this shit reminds me a lot more of Dick Duran than it does damn Lovie Smith. Now, ironically, by the time you got to Dick Duran's third year in 2001, you had that 13-3 season, a kind of miraculous season where Duran was kind of the hot seat. But 2 years later, he was gone. Lovie Smith wasn't the first choice, but he ended up being a really good choice, and he made it 9 seasons in Chicago. What you've got to hope is at some point in time in the next 2 years, that Eberflus and this team goes on a deep run in the playoffs. And there's an opportunity, there's a pathway, there's a chance in an NFC that could be very wide open in a very big hurry. So it doesn't have to be total doom or gloom. I am also fascinated to see how Eberflus is going to work with this defense, because there are going to be some systematic changes here. Now, we could talk about the switch from a 3-4 to a 4-3, and that's going to happen ultimately, you would envision. Eberflus is going to run more of his base 4-3, but you run that base so infrequently now that it just doesn't matter as much. Most teams are running some variation of a 4-1-6 or a 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5 or something along those lines, so that just doesn't matter as much. But when you look at the larger vision and role, taking Roquan from playing an inside linebacker in a 3-4 to playing a Darius Leonard type of will linebacker in a 4-3, that is interesting. That is appealing. Some type of Derek Brooks type of performance that you could see, Darius Leonard type of performance. You could be poised to see Roquan Smith have his best season of his career in 2022. You look at this system and you say, Robert Quinn and Khalil Mack, maybe there is a sense and argument to keep both of those guys, because these are guys that are well positioned to play with their hand in the dirt, but they can also do other things. You can move them around, but they can be 4-3 base ends and be very effective, and have been, both of them, at different points in times in their career. So, that said, while it is intriguing in terms of the upside and some of the things, it also potentially creates some additional needs for the roster. You'd assume Eddie Goldman's gone, because what purpose does he really serve at this point? Do you really have the 3 technique that you need? Does it mean you're going to try and keep Akeem Hicks and flip him back inside to play 3 technique? Or are you going to go get somebody else? Do you really think Bilal Nichols is better as a 3 technique than he was as a 5 technique? There are going to be questions here. You still have work in the secondary, but is the secondary really going to fit? Do you have the type of ball hawks and turnover machines that you require and are necessary in order to run this Eberflus defense? So you could have brought in a guy that doesn't initially solve any of the problems on the offensive side of the ball and actually create some additional problems on the defensive side of the damn ball. So yeah, I'm not going to sit there and pretend like this is some great hire. It may turn out to be. The reality is you never know. But a lot of the defenses I'm seeing for this hire, a lot of the excuses, justifications I'm seeing for this hire are just Bears football bullshit of people trying to avoid their disappointment and cope with the reality of being a Bears fan and trying to get caught up in the fucking bear down mentality. That's all this is. If you can honestly, truly tell me that Matt Eberflus being your next head coach makes you excited, you're fucking lying to me. And more importantly, you're lying to yourself. If you're taking a wait-and-see approach, I understand that. If you're saying ultimately he is destined to fail, I understand that. I am somewhat inclined to agree with you in saying we're going to be right back in the same spot in 3 or 4 goddamn years, because of course the Chicago Bears went from having their football operations run by guys named Ryan and Matt to, you guessed it, being run by guys named Ryan and Matt. More shit changes, the more shit stays the same. I just don't get what was such the hurry to hire a damn Eberflus here. You want to believe that Ryan Poles had all this power in this process. Believe it all you want, but again, you're lying to others and you're lying to yourself. That's bullshit. He didn't even bother bringing other people in. He didn't expand the list of finalists. He took a pre-selected list of finalists and made his choices. That's not total control over the process. So if you think this is any different than anything else we've seen historically with this organization under the leadership of Bean Count and Ted and goofy George McCaskey, well, yuck. You're full of shit. You know better by now. This hire, in a lot of ways, is just more of the same Bears football crap that you claim that you want to get away from, but every time you turn around, you can't but help yourself trying to do backflips and mental gymnastics into talking to yourself into thinking this is something much better than it actually is.